All right, hello everybody. Welcome to this third lecture for the course PHIL110. As you may have heard, we are going back to the classroom next week. So today is going to be a recorded lecture again, as well as the fourth lecture, and then we're going to get back in the classroom. So let's get started. Last time we had been looking at the more technical definition and understanding of some of the technical words that are really important in order to characterize the principles of logic. Right? So we talked about what's an argument, what's an inference in premise, conclusion, statement, proposition, things like that. Today what we're going to first do is to try to see how we can get better at identifying arguments and inferences as well as their structure. Now, if we want to become really good at writing and analyzing arguments, with great clarity and understanding, there are some tricks that we should make sure that we're familiar with. And the idea is that there are certain words or expressions in English that have a specific function that are going to help us to identify arguments. So some are called premise indicators and others are called inference indicators, or you can use the name conclusion indicators. Both are used interchangeably. And using premises and inference indicators is essential to writing clear arguments. So when you're going to be writing essays, if you want to write in a clearer way so that your readers really understand what you mean and what is the structure of your arguments, use plenty of those indicators. And they will be invaluable for them. So premises indicators, as the name suggests, are just words or expressions signaling that a premise of an argument is introduced. And there are many words in English that are used to do that. So here are some of the most common ones, and it's by no means an exhaustive list. There are many more, but since, for, because, on account of, inasmuch as, for the reason that, right? All of those things would be followed by a statement. And the statement that follows would play the role of a premise within an argument. Now, as I said, it's not meant as an exhaustive list. So you should be able to think about others if you think about it. There are many choices. Maybe another one would be given that. Given that is often a good way of introducing a premise. Sometimes you could introduce two premises at once by using the pair of indicators on the one hand, on the other hand, right? Now you introduce two facts that will play the role of premise. And again, there are many more. Those are just some of the examples. Inference indicators indicate not that something is a premise, but rather that an inference is made from the premises to the conclusion, which is why they're also called conclusion indicators, because normally they are put just before the conclusion to indicate that a conclusion is following. So some of the most common ones are therefore, thus, it follows that, so, hence, consequently, as a result, in conclusion. So those are very common ones. There are, again, others. What could be an example? This entails that, and then you follow with the conclusion. And again, there are many more. So let's have a look at how it works within the context of a few examples. So we're going to read an argument, and we're going to try to identify all the inference and premise indicators that we can. And also, we're going to try to identify the main conclusion, or if there is one or more, subconclusions. So here's the slightly silly example that we're going to start with. Jesus can walk on water, but I can walk on cucumbers, and cucumbers are 96% water. Therefore, I'm 96% Jesus. Solid mathematics right there, I presume. Of course not, right? It's a silly example, but despite the fact that the argument is silly, it does not prevent us from looking for premises and inference indicators. So are there words of expressions in there that tell us, hey, what follows is a premise, or hey, what follows is a conclusion? Indeed, there are some of those words. I'm sure some of you will find them very quickly. You can pause if you want to think about it, but here they are. So the ones in black, but, and here introduce two different premises, two facts that are providing support for something else. And that something else is the conclusion, which is introduced with the inference or conclusion indicator, therefore. So then what is the conclusion? Well, this is what is announced by the inference indicator, therefore. So it's the sentence, the silly sentence, I'm 96% Jesus. So hopefully nothing hard there. Let's do a couple more examples just to make sure we're on top of that. Now, in a complex argument, a complex argument is an argument that can contain many other arguments. So in a complex argument, there's got to be at least as many inferences as there are inference indicators. If you have two inference indicators, that means there's at least two arguments that are part of the complex argument. There can even be more because some don't have an indicator if people don't write clearly. So here's an example of that. I always like to make fun a little bit of soccer fans. Nothing personal, it's just, it's amusing. So here's the example. Some people believe that soccer is as interesting as hockey. But what makes a sport interesting is fast play, agility, and the occasional goon activity. None of these are to be found in a soccer game. So soccer is clearly less interesting than hockey. Moreover, people who entertain false beliefs clearly lack judgment, and we've shown that soccer fans do entertain false beliefs. As a consequence, soccer fans lack judgment. All right. So I'm sure soccer fans will be happy to learn that. But the first question we're going to ask ourselves is, well, can we identify any premise or inference indicators in this fairly long argument? And I think we should be able to do so. Again, you can pause a second if you want to try to find them yourselves. But here they are. We see the word so is an inference indicator. And we've shown that is another inference indicator. It was not on our initial list, but definitely that's an inference indicator. And as a consequence is also one. And the words but and moreover are both premise indicators. So immediately we know here that we are facing a complex argument that contains at least three sub-arguments. Why? Because there are three inference indicators, right? So that's easy to figure out. So let's try to find what would be the main conclusion and what would be the sub-conclusion of this complex argument. All right? So the main conclusion is the main point we are trying to defend, the thing that receives supports from everything else which is presented in the argument. And this is what? Well, this is the sentence, soccer fans lack judgment. Well, I did it in the wrong order. It's the sentence, soccer fans lack judgment. Now, if we look at the way the argument works here, we're going to see that this main conclusion, soccer fans lack judgment, is supported by two other sentences that are working together to provide support to the conclusion. Independently, they don't support the conclusion, but when you put them together, they do provide support for the conclusion. The first is soccer is clearly less interesting than hockey. And the second is, the first is that people who entertain false belief lack judgment. The second is that soccer fans entertain false beliefs, and that leads to the conclusion. Right? And then we have a second sub-conclusion here. Soccer is clearly less interesting than hockey. And this one is supported by the first three premises. So I hope that makes sense. You're going to be looking, by the way, at those examples again in the context of your tutorials next week. Here's a third example. We have, it's important to do things that can help saving the planet by adapting our daily habits. We're all aware of that these days. Saving the planet is important. Then it continues. The biggest danger faced by the planet is the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide increases because too many plants are killed. Now, the leading killers of trees are beavers, and the leading killers of herbs are vegetarians. So we should change our daily habits of eating beef, pork, and chicken meat and eat beavers and vegetarians instead. So if you're a vegetarian, be on your guard. Those environmentalists are coming for you. I'm joking again, obviously. Not a very good joke at that, but hey, it's better than something completely dry. So let's turn to the main business of the day, which is identifying premises and inference indicators. So can we find any? Right? So we just, scan the words, etc., etc. We see the word now. Now is often used to introduce a new fact. And that seems to be what it's doing here. So that's likely to be a premise indicator. And the word so, as we saw, is an inference indicator. Right? So that's the only two that we have here. So then it's possible that this argument is a simple argument in the sense that all the premises, there is what, 4 of them, work together to provide support to the conclusion. Now, it might not be fully satisfactory support because the conclusion, might be a little bit controversial at the very least. Right? So it does seem that there's only one inference in this argument and that the main conclusion is the sentence introduced by so. All right, so that's not too complicated, I hope. But it's important to be able to identify conclusions and subconclusions if we want to be good at analyzing arguments, which is what we're going to turn to in the second part of this lecture. But just before that, I need to flag that it's often the case that when people present arguments to defend a conclusion, they don't write everything that is relevant to the argument working. Sometimes there might be a premise which is left unsaid, and sometimes they don't even say the conclusion because it's so obvious what follows from the premises that are given. Now, when we have an incomplete argument, that's called an enthymeme. So that's a nice little word. Now, let's just look at a few examples that show why a premise might be left missing instead of stated explicitly. So here's an argument. Edward Snowden is an American citizen, so he's entitled to due process. So in the way it is given, the conclusion doesn't follow from the premise. But if someone enunciates this argument, it must be because they're assuming something which is left unsaid. And here it would be left unsaid because it's taken to be so obvious and so clear that it doesn't need to be said. Everybody knows that. It's common knowledge. And here the missing premise would be all American citizens are entitled to due process, right? Now, this is common knowledge, but I'm sure Edward Snowden would be pleased to hear that people have decided to live up to it. So here, a premise is left out because it's common knowledge. Nothing is seen to be gained from stating it explicitly. Sometimes there are other reasons for not stating one of the premises. And that happens a lot in comedy, right? If you were just to say something directly, then people might find it controversial. But if you let them infer that you are assuming it for a point you're making, then it can have a very funny effect and make the point a little bit more acceptable. So here's an example that I want to take. I hope you, or I hope, it doesn't really matter, but there's a very popular show on Netflix called Orange is the New Black. So that's the background to the example that I'm giving you. Now, a few years ago, there was someone who was Speaker of the House in the US. His name was John Boehner. And as you see, he has a face of a particular color. I guess his tanning bed or what's not is doing something funny. And then there's something called the White House Correspondents' Dinner every year in the US, where all the journalists go and mingle with politicians like they were not doing that for the rest of the year. All right. So presidents make jokes at this thing, which is where I've taken the example from. And Obama was very good. He has a good sense of humor, or at least he had good writers. Anyway, something. But he said, these days, House Republicans give John Boehner a harder time than they give me, which means orange really is the new black. Now, as you see, the conclusion does not follow from the premise. So first of all, what is the conclusion and what is the premise? Well, the conclusion is just orange really is the new black, which means here serves as an inference indicator. And the premise is, well, these days, House Republicans give John Boehner a harder time than they give me, Barack Obama. Right? Whoops. Now, there's a missing premise, as I suggested, because orange really is the new black does not follow from what is said about John Boehner. Of course, the missing premise is in the background that John Boehner is a Republican and he has an orange skin. And furthermore, that normally Republicans give black people a hard time. So here we have a very funny moment that arises precisely because we have an argument presented with a missing premise. All right, so let's not go into that more because in this course, for simplicity, just always assume that all the premises and the conclusions have been written, unless it's a question explicitly about enthymemes. Now, the reason I tell you that is just because occasionally I'm going to present invalid arguments to you, and some people might think, oh, it's a valid argument, it's just that there's a missing premise, right? So that would make it hard to figure out what is the correct answer to the question. So for the course, just assume that the way the argument is presented is what it is. There's never any missing premise and conclusion. So that should simplify matters quite a bit when you're answering questions. Now, a useful skill to have, which complements what we've just done, is to look at argument diagram. So especially for complex argument, understanding the structure of the complex argument by representing it into a diagram is really, really helpful. So we don't have time to cover it in class this semester because it's a little bit shorter than normal, but you're going to look at that in the tutorials next week. well, this week, sorry. I'm recording that ahead of time. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do argument diagrams in the exam, but it will be part of a quiz. Okay? So now let's talk about what's really important for us in logic, namely, how should we decide whether an inference is good? Right? Because that's really what logic is about, distinguishing good arguments from bad arguments. And another way of asking this question, because, the word good is a little bit, could mean many things. It's a little bit ambiguous. So another way of thinking about this question is, thus a particular inference give us reasons to believe that its conclusion is true. Because at the end of the day, that's why we argue about things, to try to determine whether some statements are true or false. And the argument is supposed to give us reasons to believe that it's true or false. So we're going to look at this question and break it down into a couple criteria. But we've already gone over some examples, so we already have some sort of intuitive understanding of what we should do mentally in order to decide whether an argument is good or not. But let me break it down in exactly two questions. Right? So should we believe the conclusion of the inference is true? Well, before answering that, you just need to answer two questions. The first one is, you're going to check if the conclusion follows from the premises. And the second thing is, you're going to check whether the premises are true. And if both conditions obtain, then you do have reasons to believe the conclusion. Okay? So note that the distinction between those two criteria corresponds to what we saw before when we were looking at the traditional way of structuring the educational curriculum, where you had the quadrivium to improve your judgment, figuring out what is true, criterion number 2, versus the one that was the trivium, which was more about how to organize your thought, which is about reasoning, question number 1. Okay? So here's an example of an argument that passes the first test but not the second test. If the moon is made of Swiss cheese, then it's riddled with holes, right? Because that's how Swiss cheese is. Second premise, the moon is made of Swiss cheese, and those 3 little dots mean therefore. I don't know if I've mentioned that before, but they mean therefore. And the conclusion is the moon is riddled with holes. Now, if we look at the two premises, if it's made of Swiss cheese, then it's riddled with holes. Oh, it is made of Swiss cheese, so it's riddled with holes, right? The conclusion does follow from the two premises, meaning if the two premises are true, the conclusion is true as well. Now, are the premises both true? I hope you came up with the answer no. Otherwise, we might have to do a little bit of catch-up in astronomy. And the conclusion is false as well, obviously. Right? So this argument here passes the first test about thoughts being organized in a way that the conclusion follows from the premises, but the starting point is false. The moon is not made of Swiss cheese. So the argument in itself does not give us reason to believe that the conclusion is true. We need really to pass both tests. So let's examine some of the technical terms that are associated with the answer to those two tests, those two questions. So the best kind of argument is one that passes both tests, as we just saw. And when an argument passes both tests, it's going to be called sound. So a sound argument is an argument whose conclusion follows from the premises, and furthermore, all the premises are true. And when an argument is not sound, then it's called unsound. So an argument that is sound gives us the strongest possible reasons to believe that the conclusion is true. And this is because an argument that's sound is better than one that is not sound, because one that is not sound can start from false premises, or the conclusion won't follow from the conclusion. The conclusion won't follow from the premises. Sorry. Now, in this course, we are not here to really debate too much about what's true and what's false. Right? We're not going to have a debate in this course about whether the moon is made of cheese or not. This course is really about looking at logical connections between various statements. So we're really going to focus on the first question, which is about whether the conclusion follows from the premises. And if it does, how do we show that the conclusion follows from the premises? So we've just introduced soundness because it tells us why we are arguing to begin with, but this course focuses really on one of the two questions. So let's talk more about what it means for the conclusion to follow from the premises, since that's going to be the focus of this course. Now, in the simple cases, we've looked at some of them, right, like the moon, etc. That's fairly simple, right? We have a good intuitive grasp of whether the conclusion follows from the premises or not. But in the more complicated cases, we might want to have a more systematic account of what it means for the conclusion to follow from the premises. So let's talk a little bit about what follows from means. So one way in which it is very often discussed is to say this, right? Follow from is to be understood in terms of truth preservation. So to ask whether the conclusion follows from the premises is to ask whether the truth is preserved when we moved from the premises to the conclusion. If we start from true premises and we end with a true conclusion, then truth is preserved. But if we start from true premises and we end up with a false conclusion, truth is not preserved, right? So when truth is not preserved, it's clear that the conclusion does not follow from the premises. So let's talk a little bit more about what it means for truth to be preserved. It says that, as I just said, if the premises are true, then the conclusion will also be true. And it's really a good way to perhaps think about what we want to avoid. So think about the negative case. And what we really, really want to avoid at all costs is, well, okay, not at all costs, but how should I say? For the purpose of this course, what we really, really want to avoid is an argument that goes from truth to falsity. And we want to devise a method to avoid doing that. And note that it is not asking you whether the premises are true or whether the conclusion is true. It's just a conditional relationship between premises being true and the conclusion being true. Now, truth preservation comes in degree. You have arguments that preserve truth in a way that is necessary or guaranteed. That is to say, if the premises are true, then it is necessary or guaranteed 100% that the conclusion is true as well. But most of the time, perhaps, it is not preserved in a way that is necessary or guaranteed, even if it could be like overwhelmingly likely. Now, arguments that preserve truth in a way that is necessary or guaranteed are called deductive arguments. And arguments that do not preserve truth in a way that is necessary or guaranteed are called inductive arguments. This course is going to focus on deductive arguments. But let me just say a little bit about inductive arguments so you see the contrast between the two. So inductive inferences are very common, both in daily life and in scientific practice. They include things like statistical generalizations or analogies or what's called a simple induction, where we look at a few cases and we generalize. So Some inductive arguments can be very good. They are often our guide to action in life, but some are also very bad. So let's just look at a few examples. Suppose I say 95% of students find logic truly exciting. We're going to be optimistic here. And secondly, I say Minnie is an SFU student, therefore Minnie finds logic truly exciting. Now, if Minnie is just chosen at random as a person, in the second premise, then probably the conclusion is fairly likely to follow, provided that the premises are true. In fact, it's 95% probable, right? But it's also possible that the conclusion is false, because Minnie could be among those poor few people who do not find logic truly exciting. So you see that the premises do give support to the conclusion, but it's not guaranteed that the conclusion is true if the premises are true. Now, here's another example that doesn't involve probabilities. Most European countries have condemned Russia over the annexion of Crimea. Therefore, Norway has condemned Russia for that. Now, if you're like me, you're like, that happened, how many years ago now? Was it 10 years ago? No, not 10 years ago. Probably like 6 years ago. I forgot all the facts about it. But, if most European countries have condemned Russia for that, probably Norway did, right? That seems like a plausible thing to say. But again, we didn't say that all European countries have condemned Russia for that. Russia certainly hasn't condemned itself, right? So it's only probably true that Norway did so. And so again, we have an example where the premise gives us some reasons to believe the conclusion, but it's not guaranteed that the conclusion is true if the premises are. Right? So those are inductive arguments. They are very important. They are very useful in practice. But this is not what this course is about. If you want to learn more about inductive arguments, there's a course, Philosophy 105, that you can take, and you will be talking about that extensively. For this course, we really want to focus on the deductive arguments. So just to see the contrast, let's compare those two arguments with one that we've already seen. Right? All animals are mortal. All humans are animals, therefore all humans are mortal. Here, if both premises are true, it's absolutely guaranteed that the conclusion is true as well, right? No questions. If Oprah runs for oh no, I made a mistake. I changed the year because that's what one does. If Oprah runs for president in 2024, then she will win, and that should be a 2024 as well. My apologies. Oprah will run for president in 2020, therefore Oprah will win. Right? So with the minor correction for the year, those two premises together, if they are both true, make it absolutely guaranteed that the conclusion is true as well. Now, of course, we don't know whether either of the premises are true or false, but it really does not matter to judging whether the conclusion follows from the premises. In each case, if the premises are both true, it's not just probable that the conclusion is true. It's guaranteed. Right? And this is what deductive arguments are about. And this is the sense in which deductive arguments are the strongest possible arguments you can provide for a conclusion. Okay? So that means now we have a sort of good way of understanding two equivalent ways of describing the logical strength of arguments, namely that the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. And the other way of thinking about it is that the inference is necessarily truth-preserving. Right? So I hope it helps to clarify. Now we're getting started. We're entering in the important part of the course. Now, one of the things that remains puzzling, perhaps, about what we just said is that we use the word necessary many, many times in describing what was happening. But the word necessary can mean very different things in English. So the next thing we're going to do is try to distinguish different senses in which the word necessary is used in order to better understand the one which is relevant to logic and the ones that are not relevant to logic. So consider two examples here that I've taken from physics. The first one says, no physical force is acting on the object, therefore the object will not start moving. So, oh la 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 la. No physical force is acting on the object, therefore the object will not start moving. Well, if no force acts upon a body, physics tells us it's not going to accelerate. Right? So that means its velocity, it's not going to change. And the conclusion, say, will not start, which means it wasn't moving to begin with, and it's not going to start moving. Okay? So the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises because of the laws of physics, because of the laws that govern the universe that we live in. Here's another one, this one not from Newtonian mechanics, but from special relativity, saying this object has a mass greater than 0, therefore the object is moving slower than the speed of light, which is again a case where if the premise is true, the conclusion is true as well, by virtue of the laws that govern the universe that we live in. At least, at least if physics is not too wrong. So we have a case where we would say that the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises, and the sense in which it necessarily follows is physical necessity. Right? It follows in virtue of the necessary physical laws of the universe. Now, physical necessity, that is to say necessity in virtues of the laws of physics, is not the sense of necessity we're interested in logic. And why is that? Well, firstly, we do not want the rules of logic to depend on particular facts about the universe. And one reason for that is when there are debates among physicists about what is the correct theory describing the universe, we need to appeal to rules of logic that are themselves independent of the contenders as physical theories. Right? So this is why we don't want rules of logic that presuppose that one of the physical theories is right, because then logic wouldn't be used in order to distinguish which one of them is correct, if any. So the idea is that if we were living in an alternate universe, perhaps that's a different way of putting it, then the rules of logic would have to be the same. And by ensuring that this is the case, then we obtain a logic which is truly topic neutral. It doesn't matter which possible universe you're talking about, all of them will follow the same rules of logic. Okay? So when we're asking whether the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises, it is not in the sense of physical necessity whatsoever. We want it to be in a linguistic sense of necessity. That is to say, a sense that depends not on facts about the world, but rather just about facts concerning what the words mean and how they are connected with each other. So let's talk a little bit more about this sense of linguistic necessity. And the idea is that we have a relation of necessity, as I just said, doesn't depend which possible universe we're in or what the facts are. All that matters is what the meaning of the words are, and in some cases, as we're going to see, what the context of utterance, right? The context of utterance is just the context in which we utter the argument or a statement. And the idea is that you shouldn't have to know anything about physics in order to see that the conclusion follows from the premises. All you should need is an understanding of how the language works. So if you're a competent speaker of English, you should be able to see that if the premises are true, the conclusion is true as well. No knowledge of the world, the world's a messy place. We don't want to have to go there in order to do logic, right? So just knowing the meaning of words should be enough for us. So there is much more that ought to be said about how this linguistic sense of necessity works, and we're going to pick up on that next time in lecture 4. For today, I would just like to talk a little bit about the definition of validity. We're going to give a definition of validity in terms of this linguistic sense of necessity, which we're going to clarify next time. So, I said that validity corresponds to the first test, namely whether the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. So you have just this obvious, perhaps expected definition for validity in this general sense that we care about in logic. An argument is valid in the general sense if and only if its conclusion necessarily follows from the premises, but not in any sense of necessity, but really in the sense of necessity understood in its linguistic sense. Okay, so that's what we mean by validity. That's what we're going to try to understand in logic when we're asking whether the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. Now, as you see, we again have a conditional criterion, right? It says something like, hey, if we believe the premises are true, then linguistically it's necessary that we should also believe the conclusion is true, right? As long as we just understand the words, no need to understand facts, just the words, we should believe the conclusion is true as well. So note that since this is a conditional definition, a conditional criterion, for an argument to be valid, it is not required that the conclusion is true. Right? It is not even required that the premises are true. We're not saying, hey, the conclusion is true, the premises are true, so it's valid. No, we're just saying, maybe we're not going to take into account for now whether the premises are true or false, but if they are true, so is the conclusion. Right? And notice that it's possible to have that connection even if the premises and the conclusion are both false. Remember again the example about the moon being riddled with holes and made of Swiss cheese. So what we're really asking about is just about how tight is the connection between the premise and the conclusion. It's a hypothetical question. Now, another crucial observation to make here about the terminology that we have introduced is the following. And it's really important to emphasize that. 4 of the words that we're going to use very often in this course are truth, falsity, or true-false, and sound and valid, right? Now, validity and soundness are not properties of statements. They are properties of arguments. And the reason for that is that they are asking us a question about the connections between the premises and the conclusions. So it has to be about arguments. It cannot be about statements. And in the same way, it is not right to say that an argument is true or false, because truth and falsity are not properties of arguments, they are properties of statements. Right? So if I say grass is yellow or purple, then you can say, oh yeah, that's true or that's false, depending on whether it corresponds with the facts, right? But we're never going to say that an argument is true. We're going to say it's valid or invalid, or sound or unsound. Okay? So that's quite a bit of terminology, but hopefully it all makes sense and it is all cohering in your mind. Now, I just said that asking if an argument is valid is not asking if the premises are true and the conclusion false. It's really just asking about the connection between the truth of the premises and of the conclusion. Another way of saying that is this. When you face an argument that has true premises and also a true conclusion, this in itself is not enough to conclude that the argument is valid. Okay? You also have to look at the connection between the premises and the conclusion. So let's look at an example where you have an argument with true premises and a true conclusion, but the argument is not valid. Okay? So here's the argument. The West Coast has more hippies than the East Coast. If you lived on both coasts, you know that it's true. No judging, right? But it's true. Second, the climate is nicer on the West Coast than on the East Coast, and that's clear. On the East Coast, let's say where I'm from in Quebec, like in the summer it's plus 35, in the winter minus 35. So it's miserable year round. And in BC, I mean, a little bit of rain in the winter, but for the most part, it's very nice. Right? Conclusion, there are no hippies in Antarctica. And now you must be like, what? What happened here? Right? That's a very bizarre thing to conclude from those premises. Because it's unrelated, completely unrelated, right? Now, look, the first premise is true, as I said. Believe me, please. The second premise is also true, and the conclusion is true as well, right? So we have an argument whose premises are true, and the conclusion is true as well. But there is no connection between the truth of the conclusion and the truth of the premises. Right? So we wouldn't say that if the premises are true, the conclusion is true. There's no connection. So that's why it is an invalid argument. The the premises do not provide any support for the conclusion. Similarly, let's look at other examples. Not similarly, in contrast, let's look at a few more examples. If there are no clouds in the sky, then it won't rain. Second premise, there are no clouds in the sky, therefore it won't rain. Now, when we look at that, whether the premises are true or false, it doesn't matter. But what we know is that if they are true, those two premises, if they are true, the conclusion is true as well, right? There's a very strong connection between the premises and the conclusion. In fact, the strongest possible connection. It's guaranteed that if the premises are true, the conclusion is true as well. A little one from Game of Thrones here. Daenerys is just a rule. Is it not just a ruler? A just ruler. Now, no just ruler burns cities to the ground. Therefore, Daenerys doesn't burn cities to the ground. Now, I'm not going to tell you whether the premises are true or false. If you've watched or read Game of Thrones, you will know which one it is. But it doesn't matter to assessing validity, right? Because you don't need to have read Game of Thrones or watched the series Game of Thrones to decide whether this argument is valid or not. Because it's not asking you whether the premises are true. It's just asking about the connection between the premises and the conclusion. And as you see, there is a very strong connection between the premises and the conclusion. Right? So this is why I take an example from something you might not have seen, because if you haven't seen it, well, so go see it, right? Go watch it, I should say. But mostly you still can judge whether the premises are connected to the conclusion in the right way. So the first argument is on sound at the moment when I'm recording, because the second premise is false. There are only clouds in the sky. And for the second, I'm not telling you. But in both cases, if the premises are true, the conclusion is necessarily true as well. Okay? So we've seen many ways of characterizing arguments. We have sound arguments, those with true premises, a true conclusion, and they are valid. We've seen valid arguments that are not sound. Those are the ones with at least one false premise, in which case the conclusion might be true or false, we don't know. And then we also have invalid arguments, which can have all sorts of combination of truth and falsehood for the premises and the conclusion. But importantly, and this is really the most important here, what we will never, ever, ever see, and this is something you should really internalize if you want to understand logical validity, what we will never see is a sound argument that has a false conclusion. Why? Because a sound argument, by definition, has true premises, and furthermore, the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. All right? So this is really important. Now, in today's lecture, I have provided a definition of validity in the general sense. And I'm just going to flag right now that the textbook gives a slightly different definition. One that says an argument is valid in the general sense if and only if denying its conclusion is incompatible with accepting all its premises. And I haven't really talked about the word incompatible at all. So next time, we're going to look about how to use our increasing knowledge of what it means to have a linguistically necessary connection between statements. And we're going to connect what we have said to that particular definition. So have a look at chapter 2, and you can omit section 2.3 if you want, and I'll see you in the next lecture. All right, bye-bye.